Now, this month is this January 2012. I started this group. We had the first meeting, so it's our 7th anniversary.
Oh,
7-year anniversary! Yay! I can't believe it. Where did the time go? And I just want to say a special thank you to you two, because you are the steady, regular people who come month after month, year after year. So I want to say thank you for your support. You're coming all that time. That's amazing. So that's really nice. Okay.
One could argue that we got nothing else to do.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's
really boring.
I find it's a really nice thing to do on a Sunday afternoon.
Yes, it is.
Have a nice afternoon tea with people, you know, later, and then just be with like-minded people, sharing an interest. I really like that. I enjoy it. Now, the other thing I wanted to tell you was about an experience my dad had. He went into a nursing home for 9 weeks respite, which he went home just before Christmas, I think it was. He lives up at Caboolture. Not with my mum though, with my stepmum. And he said when he was packing to come home the night before, and he put all his clothes out, and he said he just felt a bit tired, so he lay down on the bed, and he said the next thing he knows, he was out of his body, walking around the room, looking at all the clothes that he had stacked up ready to put in his bag to go home the next day. And my dad's a bushie. You know, I lived on a cattle station when I was really little, and he did all these rodeos and all sort of horse person through and through. But he said, you know, as my father says, excuse me the language, but he says, scared the Christ out of me. And I said, what? If my dad to say that, you know it's something serious. Yeah. You know, that's what he says when it's something really serious. So, yeah, I've he's been out of hospital since, so it's been a bit hard. He said, I'll tell you the whole story when I up down the track, but and he's in hospital at the moment. But I thought, well, that's really interesting for my dad to talk about that, because bushy type people are very grounded people. They do not deal with anything that they think is not real. Some of you may know I've got an interest in UFOs, so I gave my dad the Disclosure DVD that was put out by Stephen Greer with all the collections of the witnesses, and this is the sort of person, he said, I watched it till the very end, and the guy at the end, he said he almost had me, but he didn't. Now these are, you know, ex-military people who'd spoken out about it, but he still wasn't convinced. So that's the sort of person that he is for a while longer, I hope. But anyway, so that was his experience, which was really strange. I just thought I'd share that with you. And I've had that experience. I've had a couple of out-of-body experiences too. So I said to Barry the other day, I wonder if it's like a genetic thing in a family, because Dad's never talked about having out-of-body experiences before or anything like that, but I wonder if there's some sort of gene in a family that, you know, where people have those types of experience, or predisposed to them, as opposed to other DNA types. I don't know. But anyway, it was a thought. Now Jan and Ron sent me this, and some of you might have seen it floating around on Facebook. I think I put it on my Afterlife page. But it was just for a light note to start of the year. An Irish woman calling it quits with her 300-year-old Haitian pirate ghost. And I thought that was really curious. And not that she called it quits, but she actually got married in the first place. So here's the wedding party. I thought that was really cute.
She's marrying the ghost.
She married a ghost. Yes. Do you know in the Middle Eastern culture with the jinn? Some of you have heard about the jinn. Yeah. And these are non-physical entities that people believe, a bit like the brownies from Ireland, I think it is, and other places where people are born and they will have a jinn, and a jinn can be helpful to you through your life, or it could be a real pain in the backside. So make your life really hard. And in some cultures in the Middle East, some people will marry their jinn. And the reason they will do that is because they develop a relationship with those non-physical beings, and they can be sexual. relationships too. And she talks about having a sexual relationship with the ghost too. Now, I know from all the people I've spoken to over the last 30 years who've reported close encounters with what they call aliens, that there is that sexual aspect of those connections that they have with these beings. So, you know, it's a bit cloudy what it all means, but she talks about that too.
I would have to ask, is pregnancy possible?
Well, I don't think so. But who knows, phantom pregnancies could be.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, a little bit like, could, you know, some of the stigmata I think are a bit like that too, those stigmata
It's
experiences.
also said that Mary got pregnant having an affair with the ghost as
A
well.
non-physical being.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So, and so we have this alien-human hybrid called Jesus Christ. You know, with all respect to people and your beliefs, yeah. So that's interesting. So, on to more serious matters though. I saw this come up on just the 17th of January as a news item. Of all places, it came up on an African website, an African news service. But it says that, you know, 1/4 of Australians believe they've had a near-death experience, according to research conducted by personnel from 3 Victorian medical institutions. Almost half of the study respondents had sensations ranging from feelings of peace and out-of-body sensations to hearing music and seeing deceased spirits and religious figures. And medical researchers from Monash University, Melbourne's Albert Road Clinic and Broadmeadows Adult Health carefully developed a questionnaire for the study, which was carried out by Roy Morgan Australia. So, you know, people often say to me, I can't find a lot of Australian information. Well, I hadn't heard of this, except it came up in my Google alerts, which I'd set up for, and it came up in an African news service. So why aren't we hearing that in our own Australian news media, you know? Anyway, so just to get to the guts of that, it says the results showed that the majority of people who had near-death experiences felt feelings of peace, so that was 25% of the study. Out-of-body sensation was, that was 3%, 8% had out-of-body sensation. Some people saw a tunnel, that was 6%, while others said they went to an unearthly place, that was 5%. Very few reported seeing into the future, that's 8%, and hearing music or voices, 2%, or having their life flash before their eyes, 7%. So the highest thing that was reported was the out-of-body sensation and having a life review, basically. So that's curious too, hey? And the woman, the editor of Believe magazine was a woman called Simone Gordon, and she said that the research provides important statistical insight into near-death experiences and recounts her own near-death experience of drowning, where she was flung out of a raft while whitewater rafting in Uganda in no less than grade 5 rapids in crocodile-infested waters. Her lungs filled with water, and she knew that, you know, she was either going to live or die. And there was no panic or struggle, only peace, a letting go, and feeling like she was out of her body, but still aware her body was in survival mode, clinging to the physical world. And she also was fully aware of watching a slideshow of past and present appear in her mind's eye. And it was seconds, but it felt like eternity, which is what often happens. So, yeah, and it changed her life from that point on. So that was... Has anyone here... I know some of you have had near-death experiences. Anybody would like to put their hand up who's had something like that happen? No?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think have you talked about that before?
No, I haven't. We've discussed that.
Okay, yeah, right. Yeah, so, right, that was an Australian study. And here's another project before we get on to our topic. This was from a woman called, oh gosh, what was her name? Something Smart. I forgot to write it down, I think. And her, I might have it here. Her study that she did, no, I didn't bring. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Was started about 5 years ago when her father was dying. And he was talking about going into the green dimension, that he had to leave here, and that he was saying that the room was full of people that she couldn't see, but the room was chock full of people who were just standing around supporting him while he was dying. So she was very interested in what people reported were reporting just before they died, and has gathered all that information and into the Final Words project. So I think she's written a book, but she's continuing to do that. So if you're interested, you can go to finalwordsproject.org and look up more of that. Has anyone ever had a reincarnation memory, or what you think might be a memory of living before? Yeah? Yeah?
A number of them actually, just like flashes where I flashed from this body into a different body and then back again.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I've had a few memories of, and an interest in cultures which I couldn't understand where those deep interests in other cultures came from. And one was, at one stage when I was in my 20s, I just had to have my house full of Chinese things, statues and umbrellas and all sorts of things. I don't know where that came, very zen sort of feeling about the house. And then when I got older, it was a little bit later, it was a really deep interest in Egyptian things, and I could never not get dressed without wearing a gold Nefertiti around my neck, and other things in the house like that. And then after that, it was those two, I think it was, that were the strongest feelings I had. But when I was about 22 is when I first married the first time, that I'd always felt very different to my own family. And as I got older, to about 22 or so, I found myself subscribing to a magazine called Consciousness, which was put out by a movement created by Gandhi at the time, I think it was. And I felt very Buddhist-like, and I couldn't understand why. I felt like I'd lived before from a young age, and I couldn't understand. I felt very out of place in my family. I didn't belong in this world. I'm surely someone left me on the wrong planet, all those sorts of things. And why did they do that? But there was a real sense of that. And, there were extenuating circumstances in my ordinary life to create that. But there was these other attachments to feeling very strongly from a very young age to being a pacifist. I was completely against war. And I was very loud about it too, which was very hard for my grandparents, who my grandfather had been through World War II. But very strange how that all happened. But I'm not the only one, and I know other people have had those experiences too. And there's been some studies done on, and we'll just talk about it later, but while I'm on the subject, with how people reincarnate into families. Into the same families. And and I've told this to some of you before, but when my daughter was little, she was about 2, I think, and if we heard a siren going up the street, she'd just drop everything and just start screaming. And I thought about, well, maybe when I was pregnant something happened and that sort of got passed on to her or something like that. But then when I was pregnant, at 4 months old, my grandfather died. And I was very close to my grandfather, and when we went to the hospital to see him, when I got there I said, no, I don't want to go in and see him, because he'd had a heart attack and he was on life support and they were going to turn it off. And I just didn't want to see that, and for some reason I had a really strong feeling not to have that image in my mind. But I wondered if it would somehow affect my unborn child. And since then I've looked a lot at, how people can reincarnate into the same families. Now, any astrologers here? Any astrologers here? No? If you look at the astrology of family groups, you'll find there are really strong connections to that. You will share strong placements in your astrology chart with other members in your family. So you've got to ask, what does that mean? What does that mean? Mm-hmm. And I've got an astrologer friend who says to me, it means that you plan to come here and with those people in this lifetime, because that's how astrology works. Anyway, that's her theory, and I think there's some evidence for that. I really do. So we're going to look at some of that evidence today. about one soul having many lives. And how many people, think that may be true? Yeah, some on the fence, still deciding. Yeah, because when I was young, I was saying before, and I felt like I'd been a Buddhist before. For some reason, from the youngest age, I believed I'd lived before, and that that I believed in reincarnation. It was not a big step for me to go there from a very early age. But my family were nothing like that. In fact, I'm very different to the rest of my family. And so I don't know where I got that from, how I could have learnt it or read it, because we didn't have a lot of books in the house. We certainly didn't have those sorts of information in the house. My family are not a spiritual family. So I don't know where that idea came from, but it was like I was born with it, and it was very strong. Now, there are various people on the planet who have beliefs in reincarnation, quite a lot in fact when you look at the statistics. And Hindus believe that the soul goes through transmigration in the cycle of births and deaths. That's mostly found in India. The Buddhists believe that reincarnation is true, and the Buddha taught the concept of rebirth, and that's mostly found in Asian countries. Now, you know about the selection process for the Dalai Lama, don't you? Some of you don't. What they do is they have favourite items of the previous Dalai Lama, and they place them before the child who's been put forward as the possible reincarnation of the Dalai Lama to continue the spiritual teachings for the Tibetan people. And there's a whole process. It's huge, but part of that process is the child that's been put forward as the possible reincarnation of that person is shown all these things, these items, and the favourite items of the previous Dalai Lama are in that grouping. So the priests look for, if you call them priests, look for the child to select those items and talk about them, tell the people what it means. And that's part of that selection process for the spiritual leader of Tibet, which is interesting, very interesting process. Now, in modern times, that's been questioned. I did a bit of research on that recently, and there's some people saying that they don't want that anymore, that there's people can be manoeuvred with that too, but it still holds to this day as far as I know, and has been for a long time. Jainism teaches salvation by perfection through successive lives and non-injury to living creatures. And that's found in India, in the US, in Kenya, the UK and Canada. All the places where those religions are. Sikhs do not believe in an afterlife, heaven or hell, but they teach that the soul reincarnates when the body dies. So basically when you die, you immediately reincarnate and go there. So, and that's mostly found in India, Canada and the UK. Quite large numbers in Canada and the UK. I was very surprised with that. So around and around we go. That's the idea. Death, birth and rebirth. An interesting idea, but is it true? Is it, we know that in physics that you have energy, and once energy exists, it doesn't disappear, it just transforms and transmutes into other forms of energy. But can that be true with human consciousness? Can that actually happen? Well, 2/3 of the world population thinks it can, and that's a lot of people. That's a heck of a lot of people. So, where does it all come from? Well, it seems to date back at least as what people can trace back to about 1200 BC. And since then, people like Pythagoras taught about reincarnation, and so did Plato. Apollonius taught about reincarnation, and so did Plotinus, who was an Egyptian. The Norse people believe in reincarnation, and the Vikings and those people. And of course we have the questionable story of reincarnation being removed from the Christian Bible. I'm not sure if that date's right. I've read different dates, but I know it was the Council of Nicaea, but I'm just not sure about that date. Anyway, and that's an interesting story in itself, because the people responsible, apparently, historically, this is accurate. I've looked at so many different history things about Christianity. The Emperor Justinian and Theodora worked to remove reincarnation from the Christian Bible. And there's a little story, background story about them. He was taken in by a previous emperor who had no children. And he was from a farming family beforehand. And Theodora was also from a farming family too, I think it was. But the father died, so the mother sent her out to prostitution to earn income for the family. And from there, she figured out how to use a body to get ahead. And she apparently, history says, she slept her way up the ladder. And actually met Justinian. They actually fell in love, but she became the empress. Now, she wanted to be a goddess, but she couldn't have all these other people reincarnating with her. So she's convinced Justinian to remove reincarnation from the Bible, apparently. That's all I can tell you, what I've been reading up on. So that's apparently the story about how reincarnation came to be removed from the Bible. Of course, modern times, we have Dr. Michael Newton. I'm sure a lot of you have read those books. Has anyone not read any of those books? I mean, they've been around for a long time. If you've got an interest in this subject, I'm sure you've read them, or some of them anyway. And if Marie was here, she'd probably talk about this guy, Dr. Brian Weiss, and Weiss. I always say it incorrectly. Why do I do that? He's written a lot of books, and he started off on this journey because one of his clients told him about his deceased son. So, and he's still around and still teaching people, and does travel through Australia from time to time, teaching people his hypnosis methods for past life regression. And then we have Dr. Ian Stevenson, whose work I'm very interested in because this is scientifically documented evidence, and I have spoken about this briefly before. Has anyone heard of Dr. Ian Stevenson's work? I know you have. No? Okay, well he became internationally recognised for his research by discovering evidence suggesting that memories and physical injuries can be transferred from one lifetime to another. So that interesting information came about through interviewing many children. I think there are 3,000 cases he wrote these books too, Children Remember Previous Lives. And I think this was a paper that he wrote, 20 cases suggestive of reincarnation. That was in the early part of his career. He went down the reincarnation path in 1960 when he learned of a case in Sri Lanka where a child reported remembering a past life. So he, from there, his documented cases grew to about 3,000, and they're in a university in the United States, and if you care to go over there and look through it, you can look through all that documentation. But where he went to places like, he looked at the connections between, he was interviewing these children who were quite young. I think he had a couple of cases where they were about 13 or 14, but mostly they were between 2 and 7, I think it was. And these are what we call third world countries, and they were children who were talking about the information from their previous existence in another family, and they weren't too far away, and that was what he found. So he also discovered, I think it was him, yes it was, that they reincarnated quite quickly in these particular countries. So what he put together a list of these, I guess you'd call them components of the reincarnation cases that he considered were real, genuine. So he found that these children who could remember the lives of other children who'd died in families, or people who'd been married to people before, they had intricate memories of their lives in these other families. And he also found that they had birthmarks or birth defects when they were reborn, okay, which related to how they had been killed in their previous life. And I'll show you some of those photos in a minute. But they were had very intricate information about the persons, places and events of the previous life. They displayed unusual behaviour of the personality corresponding to the previous life, such as phobias, aversions, even cross-dressing. Phobias of the instrument of the mode of death, such as vehicles, firearms and bladed weapons, and phobias of the site of death, place where a drowning occurred, or just basically where they died. Often they would be very upset and say that you're not my real parents, I want to go and be with my real family, which must have been very disturbing to those parents, for sure. And they had unusually strong relationships in those previous lives too. They could become vengeful, and they had inclinations to crime related to features of a previous life. Their play in childhood corresponded to their vocation or avocation of a previous life. And these cases mostly came from Southeast Asia, especially the Ganges Valley in India, Burma, Thailand and Sri Lanka. And they were also abundant in West Africa, the Northwest and North America among the tribal people too. And they could also be found in Western Europe and North America, but they were less. There are a lot less of those cases. I'm not really sure why, but the people have since documented cases in Western countries too. We'll get onto that in a minute. His interpretations, ordinary interpretations of reincarnation types were, it could have been fraud, could have been fantasy, could have been the child learned information expressed as a memory but forgot that it was learned about another life or another family. Could have been that fact and fantasy were confused, or it could have been a genetic memory, but that wouldn't be possible because they didn't come from the same genetic family line. They were from other families. The paranormal interpretations of what he discovered could have been ESP combined with identification with the second personality. That's true. I mean, some children could have been channeling deceased entities. I don't know. Possession by a discarnate personality influencing a child by imposing their memories, or actually reincarnation. And that's what he said, that he found that the age of the first speaking of a previous life was 2 to 5 years. They stopped speaking about those around 5 to 7 years. And there was a high frequency of violent death in the previous personalities that they claimed to be. And there was a high frequency of the mention of the mode of death too. And there were different genders in previous personalities. Sometimes they could be born a female but were a male in a previous life. Many cases of gender change in Burma and Thailand. Not so many in the Western ones I've found that I've been looking at on YouTube, which is interesting. And Lebanon and North America, there were different genders, were unknown, so they hadn't found those there. Anyway, so getting on to some of these birthmarks and congenital anomalies. And this is the case of a gentleman who was a baker in central Turkey. These are old photos because they're from Stevenson's work going back 40 years, actually longer, because he died I think in 2003, 5 or 8, I can't quite remember now, but might have been 3 I think. Anyway, but this guy was a very peace-loving person, but he had the memory of this guy, who was a notorious bandit from the 1930s, and he was a highly successful bandit too. And apparently the story goes, I think, that he was sort of cornered and into some sort of small building, and he wasn't going to get away without being captured. So he killed himself, and he put the gun to here and shot himself. Anyway, the baker who was born afterwards, who had the memories of this highway bandit, he was born with a birthmark here and a birthmark up the top of his head here, and you can see by this, not too clearly maybe, a bit dark I know, it's exactly where the bullet went through in the personality of the previous life. So that's one thing there. Then here was a little girl from the top who went on a food strike demanding parents take her to the hometown where her previous personality was born. And her parents verified her statements of having fallen from a height. And this is the previous personality, was a little girl who died after falling 3 meters onto a concrete floor. So the reincarnated person had a lot of intricate memories of her previous identity, which was confirmed by the family. This is just one of the intricacies, but there were many. That was the birthmark on the living child where she died when she hit her head. This is a shotgun killing of a young man. I don't know if you can see it there, but he was born with this birthmark here. And this is a sketch from the autopsy of the previous personality, where he was shot in the chest, and he has the birthmark, splattered birthmark there too. So he had the memories of that previous person. Severely malformed ear, in it that he remembered the life of a man who was fatally wounded on the right side of the head by a shotgun discharged at close range. So this little boy had that memory, but he's born with this defect. Almost absent fingers on one hand in a boy of India who said he remembered the life of a boy of another village who put his hand into the blades of a fodder chopping machine and had his fingers amputated. That's an interesting story. How do these children know this? Because you're looking at these countries, I mean, how would they know this about another child who had lived not that long prior to their own birth? Congenital absence of the lower leg in a girl of Burma who said she remembered the life of a young woman who was accidentally run over by a train with her right leg being severed first. Interesting, isn't it? She had the memories of that. And here's someone who was born with a large nevus on their head of a Thai man who, as a child, he remembered the life of his paternal uncle. This is where it starts to get into the families. Who was killed with a blow on the head from a heavy knife. Was he his uncle reincarnated? But again, had a lot of other memories of that uncle's life. So what's going on? You know, what's going on? Why is it that these people are having memories of other identities? Some of who were in their own families, but many who were not. Well, this work was also done by Dr. Erlander Haraldsson from the University of Iceland. And he did similar work. I'm not going to go into it and repeat it, but he did similar work. He was introduced to it again by Dr. Ian Stevenson. And a lot of these people developed their interest by being introduced through Dr. Ian Stevenson. But he found similar sorts of things. He mostly studied cases from Sri Lanka. And he found the most common theme were children died in a war or by accident, and the previous life occurred close in time and proximity, as other people have found too. So that's really interesting, I think.
Fascinating.
It is, isn't it? Was that little boy, James Leininger? Some of you remember him? He was a little boy in the States who remembered being an Air Force pilot. And he his plane went down in the ocean, and it was launched from the carrier called the Natoma. And his parents, who didn't believe, particularly his father, didn't believe any of this. His father started doing investigations about his story because he was having nightmares. He couldn't sleep. He was saying things from a very early age like man crash, plane crash, burning, like this sort of thing. And he wasn't getting much sleep. He was having these horrible nightmares and night terrors. And when he started giving more information with details, he started writing things like James 3, or which will come up in the story, but or his would be asked by his parents about what else do you remember, and he could give the names of his comrades that he had served with, and they were all adults, and in previous lives, and eventually it turned out that James, his parents started to believe him. So they took James after a very long time, to a reunion with the pilots who were in that group of the Natoma, and he knew them. The child knew those adults, and he told them intricate details of his previous personality, their experiences that they'd all shared together. And the curious thing, and they were convinced that that was James reborn. And it turns out the pilot who had died, he was James Jr. So he was already number 2. So that made this James 3. But he'd been writing that from childhood. And it turned out that the parents took James, the little boy James, with them a wreath, took it to the place where his aircraft came down in the ocean, let the wreath go. James, the little boy James, just had some sort of catharsis from that experience, and then from after that he never had any nightmares or anything like that again. But it's a really well-known reincarnation case.
And didn't he also identify who his mother was, of the second James who'd been killed, and gave her information of a photograph or something?
That's
like that?
right.
So yeah, nobody could have known. It was something was impossible.
Yeah.
And she corroborated that and said she couldn't believe it. Yeah.
And this is what happens in a lot of cases. Is I was watching a Scottish case, and the man, there was a woman who was about 40, and it's another well-known case. I've forgotten the name now, but she had 5 children, I think it was, and she'd had to give them up for adoption for some reason, and she'd lost contact with where they were. She got to a point in life where she said, I have to track down my children and make sure they're all right. Of course, her children by then were in their 70s and 80s. She tracked down one of her sons, and she told him, this 40-year-old woman told him these intricate details about his mother, who she claimed to be reborn. And he said, no one could have known what she told me. Nobody, not even my siblings, knew what she told me, because they'd had some private shared moments, you know. So that's fascinating. I don't know. That's just fascinating.
I've got another little story for you that's current. A friend of mine has got a 3-year-old grandson, and he keeps referring to his other mother, and he keeps saying to her, when my other mother did this, or my other mother used to read me a story, or whatever, things like that. And he also said that when I drowned, he said to my friend, who's his nanny, why didn't you save me? And my friend said, well, I didn't know I was there. And he said, yes, you were there, but you didn't save me. And it's very hard to know what to say to a 3-year-old, because they can't talk. Well, they talk, but not understand a lot. Yeah. So they talk to him about it, but they don't try to frighten him.
Yes.
Yeah. So we found
interesting,
that
isn't it?
Interesting. Yeah.
The work of Carol Bowman, and she goes beyond this. She still gathers the stories, but she works with parents and children who have other memories, to integrate their experiences. So she would probably say to that child, yes, well, life is, sometimes we can't be everywhere at once, and sometimes we can't save everything that we really want to, but I really wanted to at the time, to help the child understand. And by doing that sort of work with the child and the parent, that it helps them release that unresolved issue. That's what her work's really about, but she's got an interesting story too. But you've just reminded me of a story my aunt told me, that's my father's sister, that her husband before, well, when he was alive, they had polished floors, I think it was, and mats, and they had fringed mats. And he always had this thing about the fringing on this particular mat as he walked through the house. And it'd be all a bit skew-whiff, and he'd always, every time, he'd reach down and straighten out the fringing. Anyway, he died, and then her grandson was born. And she noticed one day, she said, you could have knocked me over. She said, when her grandson was a tot, he's walking along, he bends over, he straightens out the fringing, he looks up, there's a table she's got in front of the rug with his grandfather's photo. He straightens up the fringing, goes over, goes on the photo of his grandfather and walks off. Now that was happening before he died. That was happening before he was old enough to know. I can't quite remember whether his grandfather was alive at that time. I don't think he was. But that's an interesting story. And my aunt said, I don't know, some things just make you question stuff. Yeah. So that's that story.
I have a little story about my son when he was quite small. He would have been probably about 18 months old. And I said to him, who were you before you were Christopher? And he said, in the land where the tigers are. And then he said, in a deep, dark hole. And he started to get really upset and started to cry, so I changed the subject and I didn't talk about it. But I mean, he's always been vegetarian. When he was quite small, I was buying meat for his father at the butcher's, and he said, meat, that's a cow, in the most disgusted voice. So I think there was a connection there. Yeah, interesting.
When my daughter was little, she used to see dead people. Or she'd say she'd served dead people. Upstairs, she was always afraid to come out of her room because there's a hallway upstairs, and her bedroom was in this corner. And I'd say, could she say, I don't want to go out there? I said, why not? Because there's people out there. What do you mean there's people out there? I can see them. I say, will you show me? Like this is always in the evening. She'd say, I'd say, you show me. And she'd go, there's someone in a wheelchair out there at the end of the hallway, and there's someone just walked past, and I think, okay, I just go along with it, and I gave her a magic stone because she was frightened, and this will help you and protect you and all that sort of stuff. But that was the only thing I could think of to do to help her deal with whatever it was what was going on, and I had no clue about that sort of stuff, years ago.
In this house?
In this house it was,
okay.
yeah. So the next bit of information I want to present comes from Dr. Walter Semke. Interesting man. He actually spoke, I think last year. There's an organisation in Sydney called the Australian Parapsychological Group, I think it is. It runs out of the university, or I should say the people who give presentations, academics from the university there. I can't quite remember the full name. Australian Parapsychological, I think it is, research group. Anyway, so and he was a guest speaker there last year. You can find him on if you put his name in, you'll find it comes up in YouTube. Everything's on YouTube, isn't it great? Love it. This will go on YouTube too if you ever want to come back and refer to it on our Afterlife Discussions YouTube channel. Anyway, Assistant Chief of Occupational Medicine, San Francisco Medical Center for a while. President of the IISIS Institute, which is the integration of science, intuition and spirit, which is good. I like to hear that science, intuition and spirit all coming together, which I think is the way that future science will go.
Yeah.
I've got a book by Deepak Chopra and an Australia academic scientist, I can't think of his name, and it's called War of the World Views. And of course Deepak Chopra, coming from that scientific but spiritual background, and the other scientist comes from and I think it's really good to read both sides of the coin. You, as I was saying to Shrey before, it's when you're looking for something to be real, I see a lot of people will exchange one set of ideas for another set of ideas or beliefs without actually finding the structure for the reality of what it is that they're looking for. I mean, I'm not 100% convinced in reincarnation, but I'm a lot further convinced than I was, say, 10 years ago. Because I found when I did my hypnotherapy training, I came to understand the power of the human mind. It's very powerful, very, very powerful. And we can, if we utilise the power of our unconscious mind, we can make amazing things happen, miraculous healings, all sorts of things. So I started to deconstruct a belief that I'd had in reincarnation for many, many years, which, from when I was young, I didn't know why. And when I deconstructed it, I still couldn't balance out these ideas. Well, what is it? What are we looking for? So I guess I came from it from a scientific perspective then. Well, if it's not reincarnation, what is it? What else could it be? And years and years I've gone over that, and I cannot find another answer as yet. Doesn't mean we won't in the future, but as yet. So I think that when you're looking to understand if something is genuine, you've got to find those foundational steps that you can build a new understanding on. Otherwise, it will crumble as well without filling that in. At least for me it did, and possibly for some of you. But anyway, I'm getting off track. Let's go back to Walter. So, but I guess it's the integration of these things, isn't it? And this is where, when you're looking at other realities, it's really difficult to explain those other realities with the tools from this domain, and to understand it from the perspective in this domain as opposed to those. And if you've ever had a near-death experience or an out-of-body experience, those things that we know about in this reality, they don't apply. There was a case that I was reading about, watching on YouTube actually some years ago, was a gentleman who said that when I was having a near-death experience and I was out of my body, I had 360-degree view of what was around me. We can't have that in this reality. But in that reality, he did. And he said, I can't explain how that happened, but I had it. So obviously things function in a different way in other realities than they do in this one. For good reason, I'm sure. For good reason. So, Dr. Semke's work is really interesting. He has, I'll go back to this one. He again goes beyond Ian Stevenson's work, although he did know Dr. Stevenson, in that he looks for people who are alive today and who they could have been in a past life. So he finds out all the intricate details of someone's life in this reality at this time, and looks back at other people who match the personality and some of the details of their life in times gone by. And the deeper he looks at those people in history, the stories of their lives, they very closely match the lives of people alive now, which is really interesting. But in a way that is so intricate, he thinks, well, how can that be? And to the point where those people, the two identities, look similar, behave similarly, have similar interests, have made similar, are working in very similar scientific fields or other fields. Some years ago he had this strange experience, where first part of the experience was a friend of his said, when he was living in the States, I'm going to go see a medium, come along with me. So he said, you need to see them too. So he said, okay, because he had nothing better to do, but he wasn't that interested. So he went along, accompanied his friend, and the medium told Walter that he was some famous person in history. And he said, yeah, okay, righto, because he knows that some mediums will do that to bring other custom back. So he discarded that. Then about 10 years later, he was walking on the street. This loud booming voice said something to him in his mind and said, you have to investigate the life of. He never reveals who this personality is, okay, who he was told he was. And it was the same as what the medium had told him. And he thought, well, that's really weird, what the hell's going on? So he did, he started investigating this personality. Turns out he's come to terms with the idea that that personality he was told he was in a previous life was actually true. But when he looked into the life of that person, who was quite well known, he was looking into their history, and it turns out this previous personality had a brother who was only mentioned once or twice in history and not much about him. And he'd remained in the background of the life of this other personality. So one thing led to another, backtracking through the history, came to this library, obscure library I think it was, in a shoebox somewhere. He tracked back to find more details of this person's life. He found in there, of this obscure brother's life, he found a photo in there. He took it out, he said, oh my God, that's a spitting image of my brother, and in the photo was his wife, and that's a spitting image of my sister-in-law. Wow. He said they could have been a photo of those two, the same people. So that was the last straw that sort of came together to convince him that yes, he was this person, and a whole lot of other things, but I'll just give you little bits and pieces of the story. So that's how he started on the road to this particular research. He's found connections between Carl Sagan and David Rittenhouse. Now David Rittenhouse, and also he believes that the research that he's done and the intricate details that are the same or very similar, he believes that all the American presidents, at least 4, Bush, Clinton, the guy before Clinton, I've forgotten his name now, and Obama, all had very significant roles in the American independence. Okay, they all played part, they all had previous personalities in that. They've come back in this lifetime to finish off what they'd started in those roles as presidents in recent times. So he thought he'd found this with, he found a connection between Carl Sagan and David Rittenhouse, but he found, and this is where the notes that I didn't print out, I printed out the wrong set of notes, but I had all this information. But Rittenhouse was a person who existed, and he said, damn, I think this is going to blow my theory out of the water that I've been incorrect all along. But he actually found this guy called Rittenhouse, who was, some information about him was secreted away, and he was actually an astronomer as well. So he found a connection between those two. He found a connection between Elon Musk and Thomas Edison, a connection between Mark Zuckerberg and Herman Hollerith. Herman Hollerith had a friend called Charles Flint, and he thought, I wonder if people are reincarnating around the same personalities. Okay, so when he looked into the lives of Herman Hollerith and Charles Flint, the lives of Mark Zuckerberg and Sean Parker, who work together and know each other, he found a lot of similarities between them as friends in previous existences. Okay. Also, James Mattis and George Payton. When James Mattis was designated a position by Trump, he said, he's the closest to a George Patton that we could have today. So Walter goes off and researches the life of James Mattis and finds exact similarities to George Patton in their personality, their looks, their families, the things that they did in past lives as opposed to now, all those sorts of things. And I thought that was very interesting too. Oprah Winfrey. Oprah, as some of you may know, had a very long friendship with this woman called Gayle King. Do you know that?
Yeah.
You would have heard that, yeah. Okay. Who I think is now the editor of the O magazine, I think. And he found that the personality that he thought previously, who Oprah may have been previously, and the personality that Gail King may have been previously, Hannah Gray, she was his second wife.
Wow.
She was his second wife. So there's a lot of intimate details about their lives that are very, very similar. Now, just moving on to the work of Carol Bowman, she's got an interesting story to tell. This is the lady who has, she works with the children and the parents to help them integrate their past life memories, okay, and works with particularly if they've got trauma from it. And she's the lady who actually discovered the James Leininger case that I was telling you about previously, the Air Force pilot. So she's written 2 books, Children's Past Lives, How Past Life Memories Affect Your Child, Return from Heaven, Beloved Relatives Reincarnated Within Your Family. I'm just putting these up there in case you want to follow them up. You can chase her down on her website. And she's got a lot of good information on there. Maybe another theory could be that we come back to have experience the other side of the things that we were involved with previously. Maybe if we were a male, we might have come back as a female. Maybe if we were, from an Aboriginal person, we might have come back from an early explorer, as an early Australian explorer. I don't know. Maybe it's just to have experiences, different experiences, and maybe that's a karmic thing. I don't know. It's people who reincarnate in families. Why do they come back to that family? If it's been a rotten family, why don't you go and go to a different family? Those sorts of things. What's that about? Are we given just a handful of possibilities, or and we can make a choice out of that? Because I've read theories about reports from people who've had near-death experiences say that when they go to the other side, they can be met by a spirit being and taken into a room where they are shown some possibilities, but those possibilities, not all of these as well. Because on the path that you're on, which you had chosen before, you have to go on. You have to choose out of these, because if you do that, it won't take you down that path. That's it's something that I've read about too. I don't know. Yeah, I sort of go along with the idea that we come to have the experience of many facets of existence. Well, that's a possibility. Whether it's I know there's this idea that we live over and over and over again, and as we repeat, we're supposed to learn and become better people and all those sorts of things. That's one theory. Maybe another one is just to, like a jewel that has many facets, we just have all those different types of experiences to understand things. This woman had an experience where she had a vision of an elderly, wizened knight with grey hair wearing the chainmail mesh from the 12th century appeared to her while she was doing housework, I think it was, from memory, and one day. And anyway, from there it progressed to over a 4-year period where that was the only vision she ever had of this particular person who called himself Willem. And from that particular point in time, every night she would have a dream and he would pass on information about details of history. And she started to record it, and she has books of all these recorded information. And after 4 years, that's a long time, she thought, well, I'm either going crazy or there's something real in there. So she decided to go overseas and actually investigate the history of the details that she was given by this person. Long story short, with the help of a a very good apparently, person in the UK who could access Akashic records from from movie makers of as yet to be undisclosed movies, but the researchers were working on the details. It was so obscure about this person's life, who'd appeared to her, that you would have to be, very interested in history to dig out these obscure details about their existence, and help from a few other people, and from going to locations, to churches, looking up the records in France and in Spain. All this what happened was when this person, Willem, appeared to her, first off, she said, "What do you want?" And he said, "Atonement." And she always thought she had to atone to him for something that she had done. Turns out it was the other way around. He was reaching out to her from the 12th century into the future to atone for misdoings on his part towards her in history. So that was a really interesting case because she had, it was well documented by her. There were historical records that she could use to corroborate the evidence that he had, the information that he'd given her, to the point where he was not, he had inherited a property, but he was not the birth child of the person who left it to him. But a lot of other little intricate details about that person's life. So here's a good example of people crossing time, and I believe they can cross space as well, to connect and resolve and communicate as well about all sorts of things. There are some of the cases I've presented in the past where one of the main issues that people not haunt, but the dead try to communicate with us is because they have unresolved issues and they need to finish it so that they can move on. And in some of those cases, they were just ordinary things like the will to a property was stuck behind an oil painting in a house while the family was fighting over whose it's whose and no one could find the will. It was there, so they came to them and said, "That's where it is," right? Or they were told that through a medium, and that's where they found it. So there are all sorts of reasons why people will do that, and I do believe they can go across time and space, and we possibly might go back to Atlantis or time of the dinosaurs. I don't know if we reincarnate. You don't know, do you? We don't know, but it would be really. I'm hoping one day that we can find even more evidence to support these claims of people. At this stage, I don't know anyone who's proposed any other theory as to why this is happening besides fantasy, fraud, and reincarnation, and memories that have been absorbed into our minds and that sort of thing. Very difficult to know. I've done some past life regressions, and people have come up with some very interesting things. There was one particular young man who came up from Melbourne to have, while he was here, he contacted me to have some hypnotherapy done, and I think it was for close encounters, but he went into another personality and remembered details of this other personality who was an inventor. And another person who his details seemed to match that of one of the African American revolutionists. I can't remember which one it was now. That was going back a little while. So, and the similarities between those lives and what was going on in their life now was really curious too. Even if they'd made it up, they were still trying to resolve something, and that's how they were doing it, through hypnosis. And this is what Walter Semke said just in closing. He says, "We fight over cultural markers of identity, though in truth we are all the same. We are all one family." And I think that's true. If reincarnation is real, Semke believes that if that can come into reality, into our proper understanding, then maybe it may help to bring peace to the planet, between cultures and countries and religious ideals and all those sorts of things. He's hoping that that's what his motivation with reincarnation research is, to find peaceful solutions to problems on the planet. If we understand that we are all each other. I just remembered why I put that DNA there. Has anyone had their DNA traced? None of those ancestry? Yeah. Well, isn't it interesting? You might have seen it on YouTube, or some of those little clips of people who've had it done, and then they find out that they're people that they had an antagonistic approach to, other cultures or things like that. Turns out that they're of that They have that cultural influence in their ancestry. And isn't that curious? And how that changes their perspective about the world. Their levels of tolerance go up. You know, those sorts of things. So maybe reincarnation can help that as well. There's an ancestor I've got called Selena Mary Maud Dawes. And I always really felt attracted to the name for some reason. I don't know anything about her. She's my great-great-grandmother, I think she is. Or great-great-great-grandmother. But that particular part of my family is buried, the Dawes family are buried in the Toowong cemetery, and we went and tracked down one of my ancestors, didn't we? I was sitting on the grave and took some photos. Wasn't Selena Mary Maud though, but there was just something, and that name just keeps going round and round and round and round in my mind. And if only we recorded other details besides like about their personality and those sorts of things too. Wouldn't that be great to find out, or really interesting to find out that you are very similar to that person in your family in so many ways? Yeah, I would really like to know that. But in the future, maybe technology will do that, because they're beginning to, there's a technology where they're hoping to put all that information into a program, and they call it soul memories, so that you can interact with your ancestors. And perhaps you can discover that you are part of those people too. I don't know how they do it. It's a hologram. Yeah, it's holographic. Yeah, but there's they're working on it. Anyway, that's it. Thank you for coming. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it.
Lovely. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.